And I'm one of those persons, I'm sure hundreds of us did, encourage Desmond to leave Europe and come back to Africa. And Desmond would say, and when are you people going to go back to Africa? And when Desmond then left Lesotho, he came to South Africa and then became the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. Immediately reconnected very strongly with the World Council of Churches because of our relationship, and it was a very difficult time for us. We relied on anti-apartheid movements at that time, and even when Desmond and I were living together, we were working together in Switzerland, in Geneva, we were doing a lot all over the world, and I'm not exaggerating, on South Africa and apartheid. People were very interested, and there were big questions at the time on the sanctions. And things got more complex when the World Council of Churches decided to give money to liberation movements in 1969. And that was the time, to my greatest shock and ignorance, that the embassy, the South African embassy, came to the head office of the World Council of Churches to take my South African passport. I thought the passport was my personal property. And I discovered for the first time that it is not. They had phoned me and they'd said they're going to come and take the passport. The government of South Africa was very angry about the decision of the World Council of Churches. So there were these tensions, and then these staff members of the World Council of Churches couldn't visit South Africa. They couldn't get visa, and they were not allowed to come in. And the more of this tension between the World Council of Churches and the South African Council of Churches and South Africa really strengthened our working together, though I was still abroad with the South Africa. So eventually then, Bear Snode and Desmond suggested that I come home when Bears was leaving to become the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. And the real reason, which I refer to, I was not ordained, never trained in theology. And what they really wanted was somebody who would continue the connection and the relationship with the world out there, because at that point, the issues of South Africa and apartheid and sanctions were really matters that were not only handled by secular society and anti-apartheid groups. There were also big debates in many churches, trade union movements, boycott groups. And so they thought it probably would be good for me to come back so I continue the contact with the world out there, because at that point, Desmond Tutu had moved then to become the Dean of Johannesburg. And I think that's how I was lucky then to come home, which I remained grateful for, because I had always prayed that one day I hope I will return home. Little did I know that when I came back in 1988, the discussions on Mandela's release were already very advanced in 1988. And already when I was back in South Africa, though, they bombed Khotso House, which was the head office of the South African Council of Churches. 6 weeks after I had come back, they were not bombing me. I think they wanted to bomb the General Secretary, Frank Chikani, and everyone else. They decided, thanks to God, to do the bombing at night. And so all of us, by God's grace, were saved, because the bombing took place middle of the night. Though, of course, we all had to come and go to, and the first person I phoned after they bombed Khotso House, I couldn't think of anyone else. I phoned Desmond that they bombed Khotso House. And then I phoned the World Council of Churches, which was my office. Before I even came myself, I was living in Soweto. Before I even came to look at the building, I had already phoned the World Council of Churches to tell the whole world because this is at night about 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Thanks to them, because the World Council of Churches communications people did exactly that. They put the word out that by morning, where we had member churches of the world, they already knew that South Africa had bombed. So that was good publicity for us. And so we had, by morning, embassies coming to this building, and Desmond, of course, came, and Leah and many others were part of that. And then I was with the South African Council of Churches for many years, and when Reverend Frank Chikani then went to government, then I became the General Secretary of this SACC until I retired, and then I worked for the Electoral Commission. It's a long journey, but too long to go into. There were those of us who feared the suffering of the people, that things were already bad enough for Africans. And if we are now all over Europe, in comfort of Europe, safety of Europe, we are the ones who are supporting vigorously the boycott in South Africa. In the early days, we never knew that, in fact, economy and those boycotts were the ones that made an impact for change. The Nationalist Party, as it is known now, didn't suddenly wake up at night and they felt that they don't like apartheid. They must really be nice to us and release Mandela and change things of South Africa. This is a very simplistic way. It was not a change of heart. It was, in fact, the economic sanctions that were biting. But you see, we didn't have that kind. We had a short-term kind of understanding. And so those were some of our early debates, amongst ourselves on agreements, where some were saying, well, let's go, and some were saying, we will isolate ourselves, so there were things like that. Yes, not only, Leah also expresses herself more strongly, and articulate more strongly than Desmond. Desmond's style is bleeding style. Desmond's style is very reconciliatory. I think that's a word which I can't pronounce very well in English. When Desmond talks of reconciliation, he means it. It comes from his belly. They are the same with Mandela. These two men. It's so real. I worked with both of them on the Truth and Reconciliation, on its formation. So I was much closer. And that is why Desmond was the person who seemed the right person to head the Truth Commission. Is that his style, and I'm doing the comparison with, that's not Leah's style of things. She's much more courageous and very articulate on those things, much more, except that she is not a person who goes onto public platforms, yes. But in terms of conversations and commitment and debates, I would agree with that. I would agree with that very strongly, actually.